Hello, everybody. You've got Aaron here, uh, founder and CEO of Roost, and welcome to the Measuring and Maximizing the Value of Automation Within Your Organization webinar. And today we have Amanda and Jared here um, from the MSP space to discuss how they're using automation in their organizations and what they're doing with automation. And I figure it would be best if each one of you folks gave a quick intro of who you are. Amanda, why don't you go first?
I was gonna say I could volunteer Jared to go first, but now you put me on the hot seat. So I'm Amanda Lachapelle. My husband and I own an MSP in Ontario, Canada, and my role is a chief operating officer. So a lot of the service delivery and how we do things for our clients kind of flows through me in terms of processes. And I've been doing that for about 5, 6 years full time now. But as anybody who runs a business with their spouse knows, that you're always involved in it. So we've been around for 16 years now, and we operate for many different type of sectors, but mostly in the greenhouse space.
Great. Jared, what about you?
So my name is Jared Brantley. I am the co-founder and chief automation officer for Raven Automation. Prior to that, spent about 15 years working under various MSPs in various different roles. And then at the start of this year, we formed Raven Automation, a company dedicated to helping MSPs build workflows within the Roost platform and maximize their ROI.
Awesome. Now that we know who you are, stop sharing. And we're going to do some housekeeping before we get into this. First off, we're going to be selecting one of the participants at the end for a free ticket to our Flow conference. And what is Flow? Flow is our vendor neutral automation conference for the MSP industry. This is our chance as an MSP industry, as the automation community within the MSP industry, to make sure that the automation conference that we all attend is vendor neutral. So we'll be selecting one of you folks to receive a free ticket at the end. Also, if you've never been on a Roost call before, we're pretty interactive. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll get on your question immediately as time allows. And with that, using automation within an MSP is pretty cool because it allows us to, it's like one of the few things we can do that we can actually measure that's on the operations side. Sure, it's easy to measure sales. It's easy to measure marketing, but a lot of the tools that we use inside of our organizations is difficult to measure. And the cool thing about automations is one of the benefits to automations is time savings. So we're going to explore a little of this today. But before we get too deep in it, I'm going to fire off the first question. And this one's for Amanda. How did you justify the initial automation investment that you took within your MSP?
Um, well, I think our journey, part of it involves Roost and part of it involves other tools, but we're going to talk about Roost specifically, even though that's not what Flow is. I'm in operations, so a lot of times what I do, I will lay out an entire spreadsheet or a Visio diagram of some sort so I can understand where things are going to start and end. And when I walked up and I saw the demonstration of, that's basically how Roost was laid out, for me, it made a lot of sense in terms of choosing tools. I need to understand the maximum amount of what we're going to be able to do with it. And from the jump, I could see how that would be really helpful. Everybody has the same struggle nowadays. Finding good talent is really difficult. So anything that's going to allow me to leverage technology to increase what my current technicians can do, feels like a no-brainer to me. It just has to be something that we can use and get ramped up fairly quickly, and be able to see that ROI come in, within the first couple of months of using it.
Great. Jared, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the initial investment with automation, I mean, my story kind of goes back a little bit differently. I was really drug into this world kicking and screaming, and honestly wanted nothing to do with it at the time because I felt like I had enough to do on my plate in that former role. But I'll tell you that just making the decision to jump in was probably the best thing that we did as an organization that year, without a doubt. You know, just the amount of returns that we were able to get that quickly was really where it was all about for us.
Uh, Amanda, I hear from some MSPs that automation takes too much time. My typical response is, well, not automating takes more time. So how did you make the leap? You picked a product to use, an automation platform, and then you also had to take the leap to select a resource and then telling that resource to spend some time to automate. Like, how did you justify that in your head?
Well, we took a bit of a different approach, and I think I talked to you about this before. So I think, and I'll talk about this when I talk at Flow. I think that's actually, a common mistake is to pick a resource, right? Pick one person. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing to start so somebody can understand the product. I think though automation has to be a mindset within your whole company. And I think my answer really is that I learned through trial and error, using, our RMM as an example, and lots of other tool sets that we've used, that it has to be more than one person. And one thing that I really loved when we looked at Roost specifically was, like, I could see other people using it that weren't necessarily, scripters or heavy deep into programming and coding, because they would get it. It actually speaks to different people's mindsets. So when we, looked at the product, it made sense for the people that we had. We have people who are a little bit, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, shy when it comes to that stuff. So I knew that they were going to embrace it. They have a different mindset. But then when I brought it to my team, I really talked to them about how I wanted us to think about things from more than one aspect, right? A lot of times you'll notice any automation, doesn't matter the tool, is really driven by technicians that are looking to save themselves time, which is not a bad thing. But that what equals something that saves them time, whether or not it's actually, relevant to the business, relevant to the client, may not necessarily always be the case. So when I was talking to people, I was kind of painting a picture internally of, I appreciate this skill that you have, and this is what we're going to use this for. We're going to highlight, your customer service, and you're going to use that to drive that kind of process. So it wasn't really difficult on our end. People were really excited to use it. It was something I have to say too was a little bit easier because of the training as well.
Going off script here a
That's
bit,
fine,
but
it'll
you
happen.
mentioned something. You mentioned community and seeing others succeeding at automation.
Yeah.
Um, we've spent probably just as much time building community as we have building product,
Yeah.
because we see community as a way to short circuit the learning that MSPs need to do.
Yeah.
What happens here is an MSP sees that they got to learn something new, and then they assess in their mind, do they want to spend that time? And then they jump into a Discord like MSP Geek or Roost Discord, and they see hundreds of other people benefiting from automation. And then that helps them in their mind make that call to take the time to learn. Do
Yeah, that
any
was
of
definitely
you
for us too. Like, it wasn't Roost, but I was noticing that when I think it was IT Nation I went to the first time, and I was listening to somebody speak about how they had, built an automation mindset, and I was like, okay, so why aren't we doing that? Like, when I talk, I'm gonna tell you, I'm not gonna be the person to tell you how to do it perfectly because I didn't. We made a lot of mistakes, and I'm more trying to share what it is we've learned, right? And the community aspect, it works great within the MSP community, but it also works great within your own organization. I saw somebody ask in the chat about like directing our staff about whether or not they have to be customer service. I actually have an automation team, and I have different people who understand what the strength is that I appreciate. And when they're either vetting a process or when they're attacking a process, they know that that strength is what I expect them to bring to the table, and they will make suggestions based on that strength as well. I'm pretty sure we're answering questions that come up later, but that's okay.
Yeah, let's answer questions because this is more valuable for folks than anything that could be scripted.
Yeah.
Christy has a question to either of you two. How long after onboarding into Roost did you start seeing returns and time gains?
You want to take it, Jared?
Jared, that you're usually
Yeah,
leading.
so when it came to that, first of all, we were one of the very, very early adopters for Roost, and many of the things that exist in the platform today just really didn't exist back in that time, especially when it comes to some of the training content. So I can tell you, for me personally, the very first workflow I built, I spent 98 hours building this thing. But I learned so much along the way because honestly, I had no idea what I was doing at the time. I was just trying to figure it out as I went along. Now, while we built that, thankfully, that workflow, we were able to recover all of those costs to build that workflow that year. And then the next year, that workflow saved us almost $20,000 in labor. So it was still a good decision, but it honestly took quite a bit of time for me to figure that out. Now, the beauty of the new training content that's out today with Cluck U, I mean, there's no way it would have taken me nearly as long. Yeah, the product is so much more refined now than it was 2 years ago.
I think
So
for us, it was like
it,
slower because we had the wrong people. And I think that's a really important point to make. You need the right people involved on your team to be able to get it moving and understand what it is that needs to be done with it.
Yeah, now from the perspective of an MSP, when we started to build workflows, we eventually made some determinations that we got to a point where we said, okay, every new process automation that we build, we want that to have a positive return within 3 months. That became our standard. So based on that, how long can I work on this for that to return? So we actually built automation for that too, so that when we would have technicians submit a request to develop something, they would tell us how long did it take them to do that task, how often did they do that task, and then we would do some math in the workflow process and automatically assign a budget for that request. And that helped us determine where to focus some of those automation efforts too.
Awesome. And I know there's a bunch of questions. Let's get a couple more of our questions out because it'll help the folks watching along at home. When I see an MSP that's super successful in automation, one of the things I typically see is alignment between the decision maker, who's buying the product and paying the people, and the automation engineers or the tech doing the work. Like the tech wants to automate, and the decision maker also wants to automate. And if there's ever any difference between the two, one wants to automate and the other doesn't. And it's crazy, but sometimes I run into MSP owners that don't want to automate and techs that do, and vice versa. So either one of you can go first, but you made the decision to automate, but that doesn't mean that your techs also made the decision to automate with you, because it's like new work. It's different work than they were doing before. How did you get aligned between the decision maker and the techs to automate?
Well, I'm a decision maker. And I don't know, my team is pretty collaborative in nature. I think any of the good leaders out there, you just have to look at what strengths your people have and play to their strengths so that you know which people are the right people to bring in. I think for me, the conversation where you're celebrating the person is really important, because that's how they're going to show up to any kind of automation or involvement. And I think too, really good training, and I know that, Jared and I both share this as a passion. We probably approach it in different ways, but really good training on what does it mean to think of it from an ROI perspective? How do you calculate that? How do you, mentally walk through when am I going to get the gains from this? Because it can't just be the decision maker making that choice. It's going to be a collaborative effort between the two of you, because that understanding, even though it's a business understanding, is something that you want the technician who's involved in this to get. What's the impact this is going to have? What are we going to get out of as an organization?
Jared, were you kind of voluntold as the automation engineer?
Yeah, I mean, more or less. So, yeah, at that time, I ran the knock and sock team for our MSP, and as part of that, also kind of dealt with our internal RMN tool and had personally, provided consulting services for that product for many years. So we already had a pretty good culture of automation started, but automation at the RMM level is nothing like what you're going to get when you start using RPA tools. So the transition was a little more natural in terms of building that culture of automation. But the big challenge was most people really they didn't quite understand how long it took to build some of those things. And sometimes some of those things could be pretty complicated to try to build. Again, especially remember at this point in time, there was no training content. I don't know that the rock calls even existed at this point in time. So, it was one of those things that it was very much just trying to figure it all out. So there was a real issue in trying to balance how much time that it took versus, other tasks that we had available. So once we got past some of that and got to a point where we were really able to dedicate time and start to show some value for some of the things that we were building, it was like, turning on a water faucet full blast at that point. We got one workflow working, things started happening. The techs immediately started to see that they didn't have to touch that particular ticket anymore. And then all of a sudden, we just started getting more and more and more requests in. At one point, I remember that board had probably 2 years worth of requests, that were sitting there waiting for us to get. So, when it comes to kind of figure out what to automate, when to automate, uh, it was very, very easy for us to get some quick wins in, and things just snowballed from there.
I think that's why you guys have people start with new user onboarding, right? Because it's an easy one. There's a lot of high degree of error, but it's complex enough that you learn the platform. But at the same breath, it has really good impact right away. I think I saw somebody else asking like, what other things besides that you could do? I mean, we didn't really stop at new user onboarding. We did new client onboarding. We've got aspects of almost all of our professional service deploys that have all been automated. There's a lot of things that you can do, but to be honest with you, it's not one of those things where I think it's an exact template. I mean, the rock calls are great examples of how people just are so creative with what they do. The answers for what you can do really just depend on your clients and where your pain points are. You're always going to hear me say you should be looking at the numbers. You should look at where your highest degree of error is and where your highest degree of time spent is, and tackle those things first, because any of the cool stuff, any of the really, interesting stuff that you see, you'll have more time to play with that kind of stuff if you're hitting the areas in your business where are high impact.
Yeah,
Um,
if you don't mind, when it comes to starting with a new hire process, that was actually one of the first things that we started building, and that was probably one of the worst decisions that I made. So for the MSP that I was at, SnapTech IT, pretty much every client had a very custom tailored new hire onboarding process. They were all documented, but the consistency, sure, you had the core things like creating a user account and setting up a mailbox. But after that, they were very much kind of a white glove approach to each particular client environment. So it became really complicated. And that was probably the worst thing that you can do when you get started with the product is picking a process that's too complicated. If you really want to be successful with it, I think you should start small. Get something simple so that you can learn the ins and outs. And as you build that simple thing, you can continue to expand off of it. You can incorporate it into other workflows, but keep it simple first so that you get that foundation of what you're doing and why things work the way they work.
Jared, I'm gonna go off script and you tell me if you can prepare for this. I love those slides I've seen you present before where you've done an analysis on an automation you built, and then how long it took for you to recoup that. Do you have any of those slides with you that you could share
Sure.
one or two? You don't have to do it right this second. I'll ask a question. You can prepare while Amanda is answering.
I actually still have them open because I was making some updates earlier.
All right. Why don't you go over, because we're talking about where did you start? Why don't you go over a couple of them and show us the type of analysis? Because I really like your thought process that you used, and I think other MSPs could learn from it.
Yeah, so forgive me, you're going to see these kind of in an editor view here. But the dark web monitoring process was the very first automation I built. And again, at the time, I had no idea what in the hell I was doing. I mean, that's just the honest truth there. But overall, that process, like I said, we spent 98 hours building that. That was my actual time based on my hourly cost to the business. In 2022, it basically cost us $8,700 to build that workflow. Now, we started that, I would guess it was probably June of 2022, um, maybe a little early. We didn't get it into production until September because we encountered a few different issues along the way, product bugs and things like that, that the Rock team just hammered through, and fixed all of those things up for us. But the important part is by the end of that year, we recovered those costs entirely. It took about 6 months to recover those costs, for that process. But as far as what it did is in 2023, we billed 356 hours working those dark web tickets. But because of the automation, we were able to reduce that human effort by 97%. So of that 356 hours, only 11 and a half of those were actually a human doing that work. So if we didn't have the automation in play, it would have cost us $20,000, $20,477 of human labor based on the average tech's hourly cost for that MSP. And by automating that process, we were able to reduce that cost to only $672, a savings of $19,800 in 2023 alone. So obviously we're almost halfway through 2024. So that's even further cost savings. The initial investment's long since been paid for. So the second workflow that I built was for data and screenshot verification. So with that, went one too far. So with that, you can see it took me 70 hours to build that workflow because Datto didn't have an integration. We were building custom integrations for the Datto platform inside of Roost. Cost about $6,200 in labor to build that based on, again, my cost. But for all of 2023, we were able to reduce the cost to work those Datto screenshot failure tickets by almost $26,000. So what that essentially did for us is a fully automated process. The ticket would come in, we'd grab the screenshot from the Datto API and post the screenshot URL into the ticket. We'd reach out to the RMM tool and find out the next patch window for that device, and we would schedule a reboot at the start of the device. And that solved 99.9% of those problems. In the end, we were able to bill 450 hours of that work, but only 25 hours actually had to be touched by a human because we still had some servers that were excluded from reboot policies. Another big one was we were able to automate a ticket verification loop for offline network devices. So using Roost in combination with our RMM, we were able to remove a network monitoring tool from the stack, which saved about $29,000 a year in tool costs. Outside of that, we were able to cut out about $7,000 or so in human labor by removing false positive alerts. So what would happen with this is the offline device alert would come through, the RMM would open the ticket for us. Unfortunately, the RMM wouldn't close the ticket once the device was verified as online. So we solved that issue with Roost. We would have Roost go in and leverage our remote access tool to send a ping command through a network probe to check that device. If the device was online, we'd close the ticket. If it was offline, we'd continue to check it every few minutes until we found out that it was back up. So, of course, that improved our on-call resources. They didn't have as many tickets to respond to on the off hours, but that process took about 40 hours to build. Again, a lot of custom integrations that had to be built as part of that. And we also had to set up a lot of network device templates to detect devices and things like that. So that wasn't all raw development time. But the cost to build that for an internal resource was $3,500.
Awesome. Thanks for going off script with me.
Sure.
A lot of this plugs right into the next question and the question that Kelsey just asked. Amanda, how did you identify worthwhile things to try to automate?
So we actually track budget hours on all our tickets. So at any given time, we understand the backlog in our current ticketing queue. And that says how many hours have been put in and how many hours are there still left estimate, right? So obviously there's still estimates, but we can understand what segment of work is outstanding. And also in any given year, what takes the most amount of time. I mean, Jared did a great job of showing how, there's numbers there for, how long something usually takes. And I want to know about the frequency as well. So when we're looking for things, we're looking at what's the highest hit on ticket percentages and what's the highest hit on hours. And then that's usually the stuff that we tackle. And much to what Jared said before, and I think that's preached on like every Roost call, you can pick an overarching large process to make, but even if you take a small piece of it and break that piece out, then you can actually have impact, incrementally as you go along.
Jared?
Yeah, I mean, Amanda said it pretty well. I don't know that I've got much else to add with that. It's just it's a matter of tracking everything and then making decisions based on the data that you have at hand.
Your
One
PSA
of
is your
the
biggest business decision tool. You should have all of your tickets should have categories, subtypes, whatever your PSA says, whatever term they want to use. You want to be knowing what it is that your techs are working on. Any proactive approach is going to require an understanding of what the load is for you. Now, depending on your type of client, depending on the maturity of your staff, those might be different answers. That's why it's really difficult to say this is what you should start with first, because everybody's going to have different gaps and holes in their current infrastructure.
Yeah, you're bringing up something good, Amanda, that we haven't talked a lot about. If Roost was a list of just 250 things that you could automate, how valuable would Roost be for you?
I mean, I think when I was done automating them, I'd probably question why I still had it, just like everybody asked themselves why they still have an MSP when everything's working great after they took over from somebody who messed it up, right? You want to be seeing something that innovates and that's constantly growing and moving. I don't want a recipe list. I want something that's going to help me really grow my own business, and what we're able to do for clients, right? I was saying it earlier, but that whole aspect of what do my techs want to automate can't be the only thing that we consider, right? What do we want to have off their plates? It has to be, what is the client's complaining about? What are they saying is a problem for them? Where can we create consistency that makes us look competent? And then there's also the question of, what is it that will make us sticky, right? What are the things that if they leave us, they're going to miss, right? There's so many things that you can use automation for in order to separate yourself apart. You know what's crazy, Aaron? I was just at, and I won't say any names, I was just at a partner event for something else. And, there was a person in front of the room and asked the room, they said, who's using RPA right now? No matter the tool, who's using it? And we were the only ones who put our hands up. We want to talk about what sets you apart and how we can not commoditize what we're doing. we all say we're partners to our clients. We all tell them we understand business and that we're here to help. You can't be in that business discussion unless you're also having the same type of mindset of how you can improve things. And that's exactly what RPA does.
Awesome. Jared, I mean, you are over there building, stuff from scratch all the time. How valuable
Yeah,
would Roost be if it was just 250 automations that you got to select from?
I mean, it would serve a purpose to get started, but that the reality is we would quickly hit a ceiling with it. The thing about automation is no process is a one size fits all approach. Every MSP out there has, no business is a one size fits all business, it, everyone's a little bit different. So while you may have that process that's there, I think it'd be really, really frustrating if that built-in automation could only ever get 70% of the job done and never do any better than that. So by
And
having
or
a
vice
true
versa, you can't make an automation and never look at it again.
Right, right. By having a true platform out there, we can constantly evolve. We can constantly solve problems. Technology doesn't stay the same. So why would I want a tool that restricts me to only those 250 automations, period?
Uh, Absolutely. The way I describe platforms like Roost, is we're an automation language.
Mm,
And think of, we're in IT. IT is a technical field. Think about anything successful that we've done in IT that was a language that was just a list. So,
yeah.
like, imagine if JavaScript and HTML came with the 200 different things you could do with it. How vibrant would the internet be right now? It
Mhm.
wouldn't, it wouldn't work
Be
at all.
amazing. That's
Well, it
right.
might be a safer place.
Yeah, because
But innovation doesn't come from safety.
no one would be using it. Um, all right, Jared, what's an example of a process you decided not to automate?
Oh, goodness. I mean, there are several things that are out there. As a joke here, one of the more entertaining requests that I had is someone had requested that every time we got a new priority one ticket come through, that a sound would play on all of the TVs, which I'm sure we could have done with Roost, but it was far easier to hand it the remote control and just say turn the volume up because that already happens. Um, but no, on a more serious note, we've had some things that honestly, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. The amount of time savings that we would get versus the amount of effort we were going to have to put into it to automate that task, it really wasn't worth it. Um, one of the requests that we had was to build something to manage an update process for a third party application. And while I could have absolutely done that, the amount of administrative overhead that was going to be required to keep that automation current and updated every few days, because that particular application, at least the month I looked at it, had made 19 different updates that month. That was almost a full-time job just to maintain that one process. So it really didn't make sense, especially when there were other tools out there that could handle third-party patching more effectively than the tool we were using at the time.
Awesome. Um, Amanda, I got one for you.
Sure.
Let's talk about measuring what you folks built. What are some of the best practices or pitfalls to avoid, um, especially with some of the harder to measure sources of value that automations provide you?
I think for us, we kind of evaluate the security of something too, because there's an intrinsic cost where if you're not paying attention to what you're exposing yourself or making yourself vulnerable to, then that's something you definitely should be calculating. Anything we also consider on our end, how much we're removing ourselves from the customer, right? If we're talking about, a process where we have to do something for a customer, but they don't really see what we're doing, I'd love to automate that. Right. But if we're talking about something where, like, for example, people were like, let's automate ticket closings because we usually do a follow up and we make sure everything's working as it should. And I'm like, hold up. No, because we need to have that human conversation to know that things are okay. Right. For us, we have some core values that make it where when we evaluate what we're saying yes to, we're kind of placing it like, does this break one of our core values? Is this one of those things that's going to be different than who we say we are? And it kind of makes it a deal breaker for us. And again, going back to that whole evaluating whether or not we're going to do something, it has to be how much, like, the whole ROI calculation. My team is trained on it. They understand, what it is they have to be doing. We have a process that I'll be highlighting. We're at Flow to make sure that they're evaluating things correctly, because I don't want them doing things that aren't going to be serving the core values, the initiatives that we have moving forward, and that will, possibly put us at risk for some sort of exposure security rise. I think that was one of the things that we heard maybe from the sales floor, maybe in every single meeting that we had, was make sure you have verifications, make sure you have, certain things in place, because your Roost is pretty open, right? Like, there's a lot of things that it gets access to, and you want to be having some verifications on how things work. So yeah, I don't know if that quite answers what you're looking for, but that's how we think of it.
Awesome. And you mentioned security, and my background's actually cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And one of the things for everyone to think about is, while an automation platform is connected to all your tools, there is risk reduction occurring here.
Oh, 100%.
You don't need to give out as much privileged access to users. If an automation is doing something, then you don't have a tech with privileged access doing
Actually,
something.
we have something
Absolutely.
where we built that for, we recently moved our PSA, and we have a just in time for the admins, because when you're operating as an admin, you get complacent about what everybody else has access to. And so we just built just in time within Roost to be able to give people access when they need it. So that way, on the regular, when they're looking at an issue, they don't have to remind themselves to impersonate a user. They can see what's actually happening, and they're staying in touch with what's going on. And they're not actually doing things that affect workflows and whatever in the PSA that they shouldn't be doing, without getting proper verifications and making sure that that's allowed.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk security for a second and talk about app platform. So there are tons of really great tools in the MSP space that we all use today, but unfortunately, not every tool vendor does a great job at really giving good restrictive permissions. So by taking things like app platform, we can build in an app that we can reach out to all of the other tools that we have over those APIs and pull the information in. So now I'm no longer having to create a user account for that resource, or maybe it's a non-technical account manager, as a hypothetical here. I don't have to go create an account in my AV tool, Office 365, IT glue, or anything else. I can create one centralized app, and only the API has access to exactly what I give it access to, and pull that information in. I can create automations that can only execute the one task I want that resource to run without opening up the floodgates and giving them full access. I can take the single API, or the single IP that Roost is using, and restrict that API access down to that one IP address, so it's not exposed to the rest of the internet. So there's any number of ways we could actually further enhance security by leveraging more automation and protecting APIs.
Like human security.
I coming from cybersecurity, I know how cybersecurity analysts like myself incorrectly assess security risk, or risk in general, to an organization. And as security analysts, we're so focused on cyber, we forget about the business. And there is risk to the business to not automate, right? And so the cybersecurity analysts tend to not look at those risks. Like, what's the risk to the business if the only way to scale is through hiring? What's the risk to the business if a tech makes an error in fulfilling a ticket that
Exactly.
automation should have done? What's
Yeah.
the risk to the business if service delivery is too slow? Because every service that the organization does is manual.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, absolutely.
Jared, we talk a lot about time savings. We talked a little bit about security, but what are the different types of value that an automation can provide in MSP?
Yeah, I mean, so you have the obvious financial side, you have the obvious security side. You have the ability to get work done faster, especially if you're making that process fully autonomous. If you have a PSA that can fire off a webhook as soon as that ticket's created, you can get near instant response for your customer tickets. So that's absolutely a positive return because you can see an impact in your SLA responses. As you mentioned about human error, automation ensures the process is followed the same way every single time. So you're reducing human error. So that's a benefit. But the other really intangible benefit that's there is when you start to automate all of these just mundane, repetitive tasks that your level one resources are doing over and over and over again, those guys aren't getting any growth from performing those tasks. They know how to do them. They're just following through the motions at that point. If you can replace those with automation, then at that point, you're freeing up that resource to do work that's more meaningful to them, where they can be challenged and they can start to grow their skills. And those level one techs can become level two techs. And those level twos can become level threes. And you're really starting to foster more growth within your organization.
Yeah, to Jared's point too, I mean, anybody who's going to have any kind of longevity in an MSP is most likely, like a good technician is most likely curious. You see them as hungry, they want to learn new things, they don't want to be bored. And the things that excite them on day one versus what excites them on day 653 is very different, right? You want to,
Absolutely.
yeah, creating that environment where you're keeping that resource, because ultimately, even though there's always going to be some turnover, that's one of the things that like we all want to protect, right?
I mean, I can reset a password with the best of them, but honestly, am I going to get any real growth or benefit out of that? Not after the first time.
Oh, I talk a lot about, and on every Roost group call, pretty much, that the best automations are the easiest to forget. Like my home, I love home automation, so I have a ton. I use Home Assistant at home, and I have, I don't know, 150 automations, and I don't realize any of them running. It's just so intuitive. I walk in a room, a light turns on. I leave the room, the light turns off. I don't think about the code behind that automation, or an automation just ran. And so because the best automations are the easiest ones to forget, being able to remind leadership and communicate value the automations performing is super important to do that internally. So Amanda, we'll start with you. Like, how do you report on automation value?
When they remember, because I'm going to be honest, they don't always do, to put in about the time that it takes to do something. There's obviously those reports. I would say we're probably a little bit earlier in our journey, but I think anytime that tracking those tickets that I was saying to you, anytime that we hit something where we hit, oh, this is, we hit this critical mass, let's say, by creating this automation, we're just kind of celebrating it internally. We discuss it. And I think because I'm in operations and I'm an owner, I feel like I get to hear about these things maybe a lot more than somebody who might be operating as a CEO and be removed from the service side of things. I think you need to stay in touch with what's going on if you want to keep celebrating it. I mean, to your point of what you were saying, I want you to think about it. And I don't want to age myself exactly here, but when I was growing up, I think what is it? Automated windows were not necessarily in every car. It was not common like it is today. You had to turn your lights on, whereas now your car does it, right? I think taking stock and just stopping for a moment and celebrating is a really important piece to doing what you're saying, staying grounded with, what was good. But that will also allow you to look back and go, is there anything else I can do here? Is there anything else I could be improving? Just to make sure that it's still necessary. Internally, whether it's a process or an automation, we do review it and we make sure that it's something that we're looking at on a yearly basis at least to be able to justify that it still needs to exist. And I can't see us stopping that for whether or not it's a small or a large thing. We haven't hit 1 year of being really great at that yet, to be honest with you. But it's something that we have as part of our ethos, and I can see that being something that we continue on.
Yeah. So when it comes to how do you track and remember these things, there's lots of different options that are there. But the biggest thing is after, I don't know, 12 or 13 years of working with the same PSA, the whole idea of if it's not in the PSA, it didn't happen is kind of ingrained in everything.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that you can differentiate yourself as an MSP is we actually created a fake technician in the PSA. And we would create tickets for every single automation. And that fake technician would log a ticket note and bill time just as if you were a human. And suddenly you now have this kind of marketable bot for your MSP. You now have this proactive service or this automated service powered by, MSP bot or whatever you want to name your bot, right? You have that flexibility, but you can start to set yourself apart from your competitors by leveraging things like this. And as someone who kind of changed my entire job responsibilities for an MSP from, running a knock team to suddenly director of DevOps was the last title that I held there. It really became important to show value in what the DevOps team did. And the only way we could do that is by tracking every single automation and every bit of time savings that were there. At first, we started out gradually. I had two guys on the team. And if you figure your guys are going to be billable 80% of the time, that's something like 32 and a half hours per person a week that they need to be billable. So my immediate goal was, okay, I need to have at least 65 hours of automation every week. Well, now let's start talking. We want to hit a 2.5x or 3x multiplier on that labor. So now that 65 hours really probably needs to be closer to something like 195 hours a week. And you continue to scale. At that point, you realize all of a sudden you have all this great automation out there. That automation is now running, doing the work of 5 or 6 technicians for your MSP every month or every week or whatever interval you're using to measure. So you can do it that way. What we've started doing for Raven for some of the partners that we work with is we can capture every workflow that you're running, grab the name, we'll grab a success or failure and the time savings, and we write that back so that we can go back to you and say, hey, you ran this workflow 57 times this month and it saved you 40 hours or whatever that time savings may be. So that you start to understand the value of the work that you are putting into the tool itself.
Yeah, I think was it Kelsey that asked me what professional services means. For us, that's like deploying any kind of large scale, so like a server or um, switches, routers, new network infrastructure. So when we're tracking, how we've brought in automation to standardize some of these deploys, then for us, we're also looking at the percentage of revenue increase from those projects versus everything having to be done on a individual basis and at that time, if that makes sense.
Can I address that question that just popped up about how do you measure automation for something that's proactive? Just like you would any other support ticket. If it's a proactive issue, we bill that time and we record it as it's a proactive response kind of ticket. We may put it in a different service board or a different part of the business to track that was proactive versus reactive support, but we're going to effectively track it the same way in a service ticket because we also want to go back when we have those QBRs with our customers and show them all of the work that we're doing for them. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it doesn't matter if a human did it or if automation did it. They need to see the value that you're bringing to the table. So we would track it just the same way.
So I have something to add to this, and I'm not sure if I understood what you were saying correctly, Jared. When you say you do your calculations for the ROI, you talk about how much the tech costs. Are you talking to the business or are you talking about their billable hours as well?
It really depends, right? There's different levels of maturity with this, and we started to evolve what we were tracking every quarter as we learned more. So we started in the most simple form, which is just measuring hours.
For us, the reason why I ask is because to Ace's point is we don't have like the people who are on the automation team are not dedicated to automating all the time. They're splitting their time between that and something else. And so for us, we have to consider all of their hours as billable time as well. So I take what the tech costs us internally, as well as what we're missing out on in terms of what they could be doing if it was billable. And that includes proactive, because we still measure those numbers in terms of making sure that a contract is valuable for us, right? So if I'm taking them
Sure.
out of that equation, I want to make sure I know what the impact is for us. So I think that might be a differentiator. It really depends on whether you have those dedicated people, like what you're talking about before, when you had like a DevOps people that were working on that. We've never had that. We always split all of our automations amongst different tiered people within our organization, and they use, you know, a set block of time to be able to do that. And we determine that time based on the needs and the current list of backlog that's going on in the company right now. And I think both approaches are good. I think it just depends on the size of your organization and what you're able to dedicate in terms of resource.
Yeah, you know, as you evolve all of this, in a perfect world, I'd have automations bill at three different rates depending on the level of work that the
Yeah.
automation was doing. You
Yeah.
know, so when we start out, tracking just simple time is easy to do. But you're
Yeah.
right, at some point, my salary is most likely going to be higher than that of a level one technician, right? So I should be producing a lot more. And if I'm only producing, you know, 65 hours a week of automation that's only doing level one tasks, you're right. That value to the business is diminished. That's why we need to jump that number way, way up in order to offset some of that value.
Also, to the point too, that is, if you don't have that dedicated resource where their only ability to be successful or measured as successful is automation, and you're taking them out of something, then you know you're going to want to make sure that you understand you know, what you're losing in terms of being able to bill in other areas, right? Because that makes the barrier for what you're actually going to attempt as an automation higher, which it should be, because you know that's how we balance our talent, right? And yes, Jared, I'm in the same position. I have a level 3 people who automate, and I am dying to get to the point where I understand that when they put their time into it, you know, what the cost is for that versus, you know, when I have somebody who's new, because you want to be fostering, you don't want to just have your level 3 people doing it. You want to be fostering the next generation of people that'll be automating, right? So you have to give
Right,
a chance for everybody to be playing with it.
Um,
right.
let's I want to get one cool question in before we run out of time, and then maybe we'll have a couple minutes left to answer some other questions. I did a not security. So we used to do security predictions in the security market. Uh, and it's usually to try to scare people into buying security tools. Like, this is the year someone gets injured because a healthcare company is attacked, right? Those type of predictions. The cool thing with automation is we can have positive predictions on the market. And one of my predictions for this year was that MSPs are going to start changing their go-to-market and messaging to their potential clients that include the results of automation when they're talking about their MSP to prospective clients. Amanda, have you started doing any of that yet?
Already started. I actually came across a potential client where we were talking with them, and it's internal IT currently. And the gentleman that we were talking to in internal IT wants to move into the software side of the company instead of working on the regular repeatable tasks. And the amount that he's used Power Automate, we're sitting in the meeting. He goes, "I don't expect you to configure any of that stuff. Automation isn't something we expect from an MSP." I went, "Hold on a second. Let's actually talk about that." And it was a huge differentiator in our conversations, and what narrowed them down to have us be the ones to meet with the board, because they could see that it was more. And it was like what I was saying before. It's I think, you know, while there's lots of improvement to happen in the MSP space, there's a lot more people that are aware of the standard tools. And if we want to not be a commodity, we want to be doing things to really set ourselves apart and be a part of that business factor, we have to be talking about that in our sales process, because there's people that are hearing about it anyway. They see it through AI. I mean, half the time when we talk about RPA, people think it is AI, right? So in any language that you use, you should be talking to them about how you can make it more efficient. And I just want to use that to answer the person, I think it was Preje, who said, you know, have we cut staff? No, but I haven't hired people. I haven't had to hire people because I've been able to make people more efficient. I have a projects department that when we started using Roost, we were severely understaffed and we could not keep up with projects at the time. And I haven't had to hire anybody, and I've been able to actually get it to a really good place now.
Yeah, I mean, to address that specific question around staffing, first and foremost, the first way that you're going to crush any form of culture of automation that you build is to start reducing your headcounts because you have automation. You would
Yeah.
be much better served by performance managing that individual and giving them the opportunity to grow with your organization. Or unfortunately, if it's not the right role for that person, helping that person find the right role elsewhere would be the way to handle that. uh, Automation itself, you're still going to need all of those people because, to the point that was posted earlier, you can't automate a process that doesn't exist. You need those people to identify and build those processes so that your team can come in and actually build all of that automation. But it does have an impact over how you scale your business going forward. You should never reduce your headcount because you have automation, but you should absolutely look at what you're doing with automation as you plan to scale your business.
Yeah, I think too, another point is that like there's a lot of struggle, and we had a lot, especially ourselves in like 2 or 3 years ago, was in the height of COVID when everything was going crazy. How do you get people time to learn things? How do you get them to keep in touch with what's going on out there in the world when they're working in the business? Automation allows them to free up some of their time so they can stay current, they can figure out what the next thing is. And again, to Jared's point of what he was saying, what I was saying as well is you really shouldn't be looking to reduce people. It should be, how do I make the people that have the most efficient, the ones that, that are a good culture fit, that you're already vibing with. If you have somebody, I'll be straight up honest because I'm also like a culture organizational behavior type person. If you have somebody in your organization you're only holding on to right now because you are worried about a body, you probably shouldn't be making that decision for that purpose anyway. It probably should be a decision to let them go because you might find efficiency within that anyway, but that's a whole nother webinar. Uh, it really should be about how do I, take what's great in my organization right now and make it the most efficient possible.
Clint makes a good point. Um, he says that you should still have messaging around why you're automating internally, basically. And because folks will put on a tinfoil hat and automatically assume this is for staff reductions.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
we had those questions too in the beginning, and we for sure addressed them because you don't want to lose good people to them being worried about losing their job. And I think too, the more that people are involved in the process and get a say in what's going to happen, it actually helps alleviate some of those fears.
Absolutely. I'm gonna pop my screen up for a second because we're about at the top of the hour.
Jared and
Um,
I went off script a whole bunch. We're good though.
Flow, an automation conference. I started the discussion off with Flow. This is a vendor agnostic MSP automation conference. Roost, we we're living by the vendor agnostic part. We invited our competitors also to this conference. Roost took the risk, the financial risk, to do this conference for you folks. We want most of the talks to be from MSPs and not just vendors. Here's a few of the talks. Amanda and Jared will both be there giving talks. You'll be able to meet them in person and also ask some questions directly. This is the first MSP automation conference like this. It's going to be a safe place for people who want to automate. And with that, I know we're giving away a free ticket here. Was someone going to send me the on the Roost side was going to send me, was that Olivia? Were you going to send me who won? Or do you just want to say it? Oh, I got it. It's Dean Warren. You're getting a free ticket. We'll be reaching out to you with your ticket.
Mhm.
With that, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a
Aaron.
good and thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Jared, for
Oh, thank you for having me.
you folks are both extremely busy for you folks to jump on and dedicate an hour to it.
Well, I feel kind of passionate about it because I think there's a lot of things that get done wrong, and I've made a lot of mistakes myself. So if I can help somebody else avoid them, why not?
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you, folks. See you later.
Bye.